Let's go to the first slide, Vicki, because this is where most of this teaching, really all of the teaching, is coming from today. This brand new book called Cultivating Intergenerational Worship. It's published by GC2 Press, and we have already featured this in a couple of our worship summits last month. Of course, Dr. Will Wittaker, who's here with us today, he wrote this, and so, and this book is for sale at the GC2 table. So if you can get a copy there, and I bet Will sign it for you if you buy it. All right, so we're gonna jump right in. How did we get here? All of our churches at one point really were intergenerational. And Dr. Wittaker is going to define intergenerational worship in just a minute. But for a minute, I want to tell you about my story. I grew up, as many of you probably did, in the 70s and 80s in an intergenerational church. In my church, we worshiped together, all ages, one style of service. It was based on our church's unique context. We fellowshipped together. And when we grew, we added another service, which was identical. We served together. We came back for Sunday afternoon and evening activities. Do you remember those? Together. I felt God's call into worship ministry by the time I was 16. And here I am today. I don't think I would be here today had it not been for my background in growing up in an intergenerational worship church. Example, things like in 7th grade, I was asked to play for the children's choir. I was asked to be the accompanist for the children's choir in 7th grade. In 9th grade, I began playing handbells. Some of you don't know what those are, but I began playing in the handbell choir, which was an adult choir, and I was in 9th grade. In 10th grade, I became the organist. Anybody know what an organ is? I became the organist at our church. This was First Baptist Albuquerque. We were on TV. We were in a 4-state area. It was a fantastic opportunity. My parents were very appreciative that I had that job heading a couple years later to college. But in 10th grade, I had that opportunity. In 11th grade, I was directing the youth ensemble at the church. I went on to college at a Baptist university with lots of opportunities for worship leadership. And I think if I had not been in an intergenerational worshiping church, that I would probably not have had all those opportunities. So in the early 90s, many churches started doing away with Sunday PM activities. And many pastors began leading their churches to offer multiple styles of worship, all in the name of being very consumer-driven. We wanted to reach who? A younger crowd. And many larger churches did this, and so the middle-sized churches and some even smaller-sized churches followed the lead. And unfortunately, it was the beginning of the end for many churches who were wanting to continue an intergenerational ministry. And so, although some churches did thrive during that time, church membership as a whole, we've all seen the Barna studies, church membership and attendance as a whole has been declining for the past 30 years. And so that is where we're going to ask Will to come up and define intergenerational worship.
Well, just to tell you a little bit about me, I'm not a Texan. I am half Texan. My mother was born in Texarkana and was raised in Tyler. So I know a lot about Texas because we came to visit my family a lot, but I'm from the Atlanta area, and it's just a joy to be here. Just wanted to introduce myself just a little bit. I defined intergenerational worship this way. It is an, hang on. Oh, yeah. Defining intergenerational worship is an activity of intergenerational ministry, which basically just means that your church overall, all of the types of activities that your church has is intergenerational. They're engaged in mutual activities. They're understood to be valued and understood to be equally important, all of the people in your church. Intergenerational ministry, it's specifically, and worship seek to bring together all ages in the church to serve and worship together in unity. And these elements of intergenerational ministry are not just in worship. They can be worship, of course, but they can also be in terms of fellowship. You would have fellowshipping times. That's one of the easiest ways to be intergenerational, interrelated in your age groups there. Missions, service, evangelism would be one. Bible study. We actually have a Bible study at our church that's completely intergenerational. We have age stratified groups where we have, median adults, older adults, and children, youth, all those types of classes. But we have a class that meets really early at like 8:20 on Sunday mornings, and it has multiple generations in it. It will have people, a young married family with young children who enjoy going to Sunday school with their parents who maybe are in their 50s or 60s. And it's just an interesting kind of dynamic. So it's very possible to have those kinds of things. So even Bible study there. What is intergenerational worship? We're going to kind of talk through some of these ideas. Number one, it's an activity of intergenerational ministry, which just means that your church is intergenerational, means that you value all ages, that you understood all ages to be important and their voice. Secondly, it's persons of all ages. Persons of all ages. So you would have, people that are young and old worshiping together, being together, interrelating together inside of church. They're engaged in mutual activities, which we've already kind of defined some of those types of things. Everyone is valued, and that is a hard thing to measure because showing value to one generation over another, we do that all the time. We want to, put our energy into our young people because we're trying to make sure that they, get the gospel. And so we want to invest in children's ministries. We want to invest in student ministry, and we do. But we also don't want to forget the fact that we have older adults in our church, and we want to make sure that they feel valued as well. Everyone is valued. And the second thing, in its purest form, if you're having intergenerational worship, I believe the purest form of intergenerational worship means that your services are mirrored in terms of content and style. Now, I'm not going to have time to define specifically. I have 3 different versions of intergenerational. There's a natural version, there's a modified version, and there's an intentional intergenerational version. And if you want to read more about that, I really go into depth with this in my book as we go into that type of thing. But the purest form of intergenerational is what I would call the intentional intergenerational church, where the church itself, the church leadership, the church people, very intentional about making sure that all people are feeling valued. If they have more than one service, they're pretty much mirrored in terms of content and style. Now, it may be that you have a choir in one and maybe not another, but your music is basically the same. The elements of your service are basically the same. You may be saying, hey, we have multiple services in our church, but we kind of feel like we're intergenerational. Yes, you are. You're more of a modified version where you have the mindset, but for whatever reason, maybe it's a space issue or 100 different other reasons, you don't have what I would call the purest form, the mirrored form. Here's the next thing we're going to talk about real quick. And again, and Tom mentioned this, I'm going to be throwing a lot of information at you very, very fast. So if you have questions, hopefully we'll have a moment or two at the end to maybe ask some of those questions, but I'm going to just be throwing out a lot of information. And I'm not trying to necessarily plug my book, but to really get the full grasp of everything we're talking about, reading it would be really good. You'll hear the terms thrown around a bunch, multi-generational versus intergenerational. Most people mean almost the exact same thing when you hear about it, but they do not mean the same thing. And so I'm here to kind of school you just a little bit in using the proper term. Multi-generational just means that multiple generations are present in your church. That's really all it means. It means that you have multiple generations. I don't know of a church, maybe one or two, but I don't know of a church that's monogenerational, that only has one generation in it. Most churches have multiple generations. But the point is, if they're to be intergenerational, they need to be able to be interacting in some way. There's a quote I think you've got in there by Pete Manconi, who has done quite a bit of research talking about the intergenerational church that basically talks about the differences between them. Okay, so here's some things. So we're going to talk a little bit about some foundations and why we actually believe that this is something that we need to be studying. Because first off, like Tom said, 20, 30 years ago, or even before that, we weren't talking about this. We weren't having to talk about it because churches just were intergenerational. But one of the things that we believe very strongly is, the first thing is that all generations are important to God. Can we all agree that that is important, that all generations are important to God? The second thing is, somehow we've gotten off of this or whatever, gotten off track of this, and it's happening mostly in the United States. What's happening is, if you go to other countries, I've been to Cuba twice on 2 different teaching trips, and they are intergenerational. They just are. They just use all their generations. They have intergenerational worship every week. Here's the thing. Some of those churches that I visited were very contemporary in their music style. Rock band, basically, type of stuff. And then you had churches that were doing choirs and organs and pianos and all kinds of stuff. To say that a certain type of church is intergenerational, meaning that they have blended worship, or they have contemporary worship, or they have liturgical worship or traditional worship, is just there's no specific kind of intergenerational church music style wise. So you can't just say an intergenerational church is a blended worship church. Now, does it have a great opportunity to be a good model for intergenerational worship? Absolutely it does. It really, really does. One of the other truths that I really believe is that we need to honor and understand our history and those who've gone before us. Every church stands alone in the fact that it has its own history and its own general culture. Your church may be very different. I serve a church that's in a pretty upper middle class, white, suburban. Well, actually, it's not really all that white anymore because we have a lot more multicultural influences coming into our community. But I live in a very suburban part of Atlanta. And so what's happening here and then 20 miles deeper into the city, the context and the culture of that church is different. Your church is different from the church down the street. First Baptist churches, are usually different than sometimes another type of Baptist church, even in a county seat town. And so you have to know who you are. You have to understand your history and figure out what makes your church unique. So Tom's going to talk a little bit about the biblical foundations.
So look at this scripture. This is a fantastic scripture, Psalm 78. It says, "My people hear my teaching, listen to the words of my mouth. We will not hide them from their descendants. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power and the wonders he has done. He decreed statutes for Jacob and established the law in Israel, which he commanded our ancestors to teach their children, so the next generation would know them, even the children yet to be born, and they in turn would tell their children." See how this works? "Then they would put their trust in God and would not forget his deeds, but would keep his commands." And then at the very end of that, I don't think it's listed in your notes, but the end of that chapter, it says, "He chose David his servant and took him from the sheep pens. From tending the sheep, he brought him to be the shepherd of his people, Jacob, of Israel, his inheritance. And David," listen to this, "David shepherded them with integrity of heart, with skillful hands he led them." Skillful hands he led them. That's one thing, and we're not going to really touch base on this much, but I do think that's something many of our churches have forgotten in the realm of worship. Let's let somebody let's fill the slot. He knows how to play guitar. Is it skillful hands? Does he know how to read music and help develop the next generation? So just something to be thinking about. Going on to your next note, we need to be intentional in our plan for leaving a Christ-centered legacy of faith to the next generations. We need to be intentional about this, folks. And then a healthy intergenerational church is a witness to those in your community. And I apologize we're going so fast, but we have a lot to get done here. We need to understand our current generations so we can learn from them and them from us. Future leaders of all ages will develop more easily in the intergenerational church. An intergenerational church is positioned to respond to changing times because, we've already mentioned this, it values all ages. Everyone in the church, no matter their age, has something to offer God. Amen? God has commanded us to live in unity, even though we live in a very diverse world. And this diversity isn't just cultural or racial, it's generational as well. And all of our churches have an opportunity to lead out in this.
I just want to jump back to one thing that he said, because I think it's so important that we touch and we really focus on this. One of the last slides we talked about was an intergenerational church is a witness to those in your community. I'm tired of hearing, and maybe you are too, that only a certain type of worship service is what's going to attract people in your community. I'm tired of hearing it. What's going to attract people to your church is the love you have for one another inside the church. So it doesn't matter what your worship style is. So what I really was getting at was the fact that an intergenerational church values unity, values the whole, the corporate, over the individual preference. And because of that, if everyone is giving up a little bit of something, that whole idea of mutual submission that we read about in Philippians 2, if everyone's doing that together, Acts 2, we read about the model, about one of the only testaments of worship model that we even have in the New Testament, talking about preaching and giving to one another and prayer and all of that. But it says that the Lord was adding daily those that were coming because of their love for one another, because of their community and their unity. And so that's what we're really looking for in the intergenerational church, is trying to find a way that we can find some unity there. It's a very biblically based idea. We read about generations all through, and there's a whole list of scriptures that are listed there in your notes. We're not going to have time to read through all of those, but trust me, all through the Bible we talk about unity. These are the themes that we read about all through Scripture. Unity, the term one, humility, the body of Christ. 1 Corinthians 12 is one of my favorite passages. In fact, if you do get a signed copy from me, I put in 1 Corinthians 12, 14 through 27 that talks about the different bodies, the different parts of the body, and how they all interrelate together. One generation to another, together in family. Those are words and those are themes that constantly run through Scripture. Okay, we're going to make a kind of a shift here to talk a little bit now, because this is kind of a music-focused part of worship. So we're going to talk a little bit about music itself. Now, not everybody in this room may have a choir in their church, but I'm here to tell you that the choir is a great way to promote intergenerational behavior in your church if you have it. If not, I'm not telling you that you are wrong to not have a choir. Maybe your church is too small or something else has happened, but I'm telling you it is a great way. Chorus America, which is one of our research bodies that deals with community choruses, church choirs, or whatever, did a study in 2019 that basically said there's 54 million Americans regularly sing in a choir. Now you do the math, there's 300 and something million people, and you do the math, okay, it's 20%. Okay, well that's fine. Well, 20% of all of the people that are in the United States sing in some sort of choir, community choir, high school choir, middle school choir, church, whatever. However, what's really not great is that only 34% of our American evangelical churches have a choir anymore. Only 34%. So most of that 54 million Americans are not singing in a church choir. They're singing in a community choir. Community choirs are continuing to rise. And I think they're rising because all the church people don't have a choir to sing in anymore. So we're losing all of our church people to community choirs, which is fine. I mean, singers got to sing, right? Players got to play. I mean, that's just how it is. I get it. But it is interesting to me that if you look at the research, 75% of African American churches still have a choir, as opposed to 34% 5% of evangelical churches. Mainline churches, so these would be your mainline Lutheran, Methodist, some of these Reformed churches, more than 50% of their churches, Roman Catholic churches, have more choirs than evangelical churches. We have bought into this idea in the evangelical church that what people seem to want is not a choral ministry. Whether or not that's right or not, you can decide. Anyway, now, what I do want to tell you, though, is that not every church's context, not every context is a choir is going to fit. I really get that. However, choirs are still very valid in our churches, definitely in my church and maybe in yours, I hope so. There are artists, even contemporary recording artists, that are continuing to use choirs, even on their recording albums and stuff like that. They're still just a very, very valuable argument for the choir. The choir reflects the age diversity already present in your congregation. It should, at least it should. I know a lot of churches where it seems like the choir's gotten older and older, but it doesn't have to be. And this is not a class to tell you about how to increase your membership for your choir, but we can talk about that later at some point if you want to, but it should be. One of the cool things about being in a choir together is that older and younger members can learn from one another. All you have to do is to put a 20-year-old next to somebody who's been in a choir for 40 years, and that kind of thing happens. I joined my church choir when I was 15 years old because my grandfather invited me to. He told me, hey, I'd love for you to come join the choir. I was already in high school and was enjoying singing and already learned to sight read. He was a great singer, but he wasn't a really good music reader. He was okay. He had spent enough time in choir, but he was not really a music reader. Well, I was a music reader. I had been learning it through school, and I remember him telling me one time, he said, with your music reading skills, we are a better team together, and I'll never forget him using that term with me. And here was a man that I had respected and looked up to all of my life, but I had no idea that I could have a positive influence on something that he valued doing. And so we had this new symbiotic relationship, and so this can happen in your church too as well. One of the things that's cool about having a choir is that it's also biblical. As we read in 2 Chronicles, especially in chapter 20, Jehoshaphat appointed some choir members to sing for the Lord and praise him in sacred splendor as they marched out in front of the armed forces. They kept giving thanks to the Lord, for his love endures forever. We read about the fact that David was appointed to set apart the Levites and the temple musicians, and we read about that, and so the choir is definitely a biblical idea. One of the cool things about a choir is that having a choir will include more people and show generations working together toward a mission. All you got to do is just to see them working together. It just does my heart really good to see that kind of thing. One of the neat benefits to a choir is that it improves congregational singing in your church. And you have a story. This is where your story is going to come in. You're talking about your church after the pandemic that you watched on the broadcast. You're going to tell your little story. This is that point.
Okay. I hope I tell the right one you want me to tell. So the church I'm serving at, I'm sort of forever interim at Cliff Temple Baptist in Dallas. Been there almost 2 years. And my first Sunday was January 3rd, 2021. Okay, so think about where you were, 2021 of January, right in the middle of the pandemic. The church had previously, before the shutdown, they were in 2 different services, 2 different styles of worship. They did away with the choir. And so when I started on the very first Sunday, I knew that they had not had a choir in 10 months. But I said, we're going to have a choir, well, even on my first Sunday. And so the very first Sunday, I sent out a planning center I didn't know who it was going out to, but I sent it out, and we had 4 people, okay? 4 people in robes and masks in this huge choir loft. Spread out. I mean, some of you know, I see your heads shaking like we were there too. I'm telling you, it was immediate. And I went home and I listened, and I could hear them. I could hear that they were, and I heard them in person too. The next week, we had 8 people. Okay. A few weeks after that, we had 12. By December, for our Christmas production, we had 31 people in the choir. Okay? So you have to, it's like my piano teacher always said, Rome wasn't built in a day. You got to build on the blocks and go from there. And it was such an encouragement. And people from the get-go, especially after this church had not had a choir and had that support group behind the worship leader, the congregation came up and they were just so grateful that we had that extra group of people up there. And it's just an encouragement to your people. So don't ever forget that it's an encouragement to the people to have the choir up there.
All right, yeah. All right, well, and so this next part, we're going to talk a little bit about praise teams, because a lot of choirs also use praise teams or frontline singers or the front line, whatever term you want to use or whatever. Some of you may just use the choir. These are all ideas. A lot of them are my opinions about what a praise team in an intergenerational church should be, because if you have a choir, I believe it should be an extension of your choir, meaning that the people from your praise team should come from the choir and not just be your people who just happen to have great voices that they need to be involved in your music ministry. It sets a good example and it sets a really good tone to have them be a part of what you're doing there. So they need to be committed to your church and your music ministry, and these are all listed in there. I believe they should augment and not really replace the choir if you have a choir. Your praise team may be your choir, and that's perfectly great and wonderful too. I mean, that's all what we're getting at. I believe there should be some sort of functional music readers, auditions, that type of things. They need to have the appropriate body language, be able to lead development alone. But the number 9 is really the key thing. No matter what you have, in terms of a praise team, use people of a variety of ages. It's okay to use high schoolers or even middle schoolers occasionally if you can figure out a way to make it look like the people that are out in your church. Very important. Using instrumental groups in your church. I doubt that there's probably too many in this room that have used full orchestra every week. Anybody use full orchestra every week? Okay, so there's at least 1 or 2, yeah? And so one of the things that I found out when I was doing my research in Georgia was that only about 20% of our churches in the state use a full orchestra every week, and it's probably that or less, probably in Texas too. But you probably use some sort of instrumentalist, either a pianist or organist, guitar player, bass player, some sort of rhythm section. Using instrumental groups in intergenerational church is also important. In my church, the most intergenerational group in our church is our church orchestra, because we use high schoolers that play. We even have a couple of 8th graders that have been taking private lessons, especially if they play string instruments. Because, you're always looking for violin players because they're hard to find. But if you've got somebody who's learned Suzuki when they were 3 and 4, they're probably pretty good by the time they get to 8th grade. So we use even some middle schoolers, and they are our most intergenerational group. Pray for players. Use as many players as you possibly can. One way to reach out in your community is to be looking for players in your community. Talk to your band directors, orchestra directors in your school. Get some people out there. Rehearse them to fluency. One of the things that you definitely don't want to do is use players that are not confident in their playing ability. So you can make sure you have to build in enough rehearsal time for that. Challenge them, but don't overwhelm them. You don't want to throw choir anthems at a 8th grader who's only played for a couple of years, because choir anthems have a tendency, especially if you use publishers and arrangers like we do, where there's 5 key changes in every song. You probably don't want to do that initially. Give them a chance to really rehearse. Challenge them, but don't do that. Feature your players in orchestra alone. About once a month, we use an orchestra feature for a prelude, and we use that, and those are also there. Love them as much as you love your singers. Use your players from all different generations. It's really, really important. One of the key points of intergenerational behavior in your music ministry is to foster interaction in your music ministry. When I did my research for my doctorate many years ago, I was asking questions: how do you foster interaction among the different generations in your music ministry? I actually just asked that question, and I got a lot of answers, and these were the 5 answers that I got, and they're listed here for you, I think. Yes, they are. All right, so they want to create a family atmosphere. Now, how you do that in your church, you'll have to decide what a family atmosphere means. But Every family has its own dynamic. At your house, I have 3 children. I have 2 twin boys that are in college, and I have a 9th grader in high school. And for many years, our family dynamic was very, very different because we had kids that we were raising, and now our family dynamic has changed a little bit because we now have these emerging adults in our family, and they have completely different opinions now that they're in college. When they come home, their relationship to us is slightly different than it was. And so your family dynamic is going to change over time, but everybody's got a family there. Music Ministry Fellowships, what a great way to interact among your generations as you do that. Those are easy to do, anything from chili cook-offs to tailgating parties to Christmas parties to whatever you do. It's great. Where you seat your people can be really, really instrumental in helping foster interaction. You know, you don't want to put like all the young people in one little block together, even though they might enjoy being with people that are their age. Try to mix them up. Try to make sure that you get that. One of the things that COVID did for us, which was not, COVID wasn't great for any music ministry, but one of the things it did for us was it forced us to have to spread out for rehearsals, really. And so when we did that, we automatically had to change some things in terms of sight lines and some things like that for rehearsals. And that really mixed up where our people normally sat. And so we had some new friendships just kind of blossom because we had to force everybody out that. Don't let COVID or pandemic happen to you before you do that next time. Try to be thinking about ways that you can do them. Pair older members, younger members, things like that. Have corporate times of prayer. Have corporate times of prayer. There's some really good things that you can do there as well. Valuing older adults in music ministries. I think this is very important because one of the things that we talk about a lot is how to invest in our next generations. We talk about the fact that we need to have student choirs, or we need to have children's choirs, or children's music ministries, or whatever you use there. But it's very important that you also not forget about your older adults in your church. This is a group that's been in the part of church their entire lives. They sometimes they feel like they're having to give up so much for the next generations, but you need to make sure that you make them feel valued. One of the ways that you can do that, which may seem completely opposite to everything I'm saying, is you could have a senior adult choir, senior adult music ministry, because they have the time, and a lot of them are retired to be able to invest in the mission of the church, and they can be a great help there too. So don't forget to encourage this important segment of your church, because if you can get the older adults on your side, they will also be the ones that are generally, hopefully the ones that are going to understand your valuing new generations or next generations as they do there. One of the things that I'm seeing pop up a lot in our churches are these really cool things called generational Sundays or multi-generational Sundays. You've all seen these where you parade everybody on your platform. You put everybody up there. I'm here to tell you that those are great and wonderful. They are wonderful. But the real aim is for consistent, ongoing interaction among ages in your music ministry. What would it be like if every week was Generation Sunday or multi-generational Sunday? What would it be like? Now, that may not work in your church right now, and that may not even be your goal. And I'm not here to tell you that necessarily should be your goal. Your goal is for whatever generations you have, and everybody has at least 3 up to 5 in their church, how can you help them interface? How can you help them develop relationships together? And the best way to do that is to have things such as this, or have opportunities to do that. I'm not going to read through these creative ideas to utilize next generations in your intergenerational worship service. There's a whole long list there. You take those as you can read through those as you get through there. Those are spelled out. We talked a little bit more about those in the book. Another plug. Sorry if I sound like I'm trying to push it. That's really, honestly, this is just a little bit of a taste of what's all in there. So we're going to talk next about choosing song for the intergenerational church. Honestly, I would use this same list for no matter what church you had. I really would. But I really think it's really important when you are thinking about the intergenerational church that you consider the songs, theology, and the doctrine of the church. They should be theologically and doctrinally rich. Back in the day, we had hymnals that had theology committees. The '08 hymnal was the last Southern Baptist hymnal to come out. Celebrating Grace has put out a hymnal even more recently than that, but they all had theology committees. And so you knew if you affiliated with one of those two hymnals that those songs were going to be doctrinally correct, and you didn't have to worry about that. But nowadays, we are inundated with new music literally all the time. And we have to become our gatekeepers for what we sing, because there is no theology committee but you. And so you've got to make sure that you're reading your lyrics, you're looking at the direction of the lyric, which would be the next thing. And the direction of the lyric would be like horizontal versus vertical. So you don't want to have too many songs that are just me to God, where it would say I, me, and so many songs are very personal in there. You want to make sure that you have some balance of songs that have a horizontal effect, where we are admonishing one another to be able to sing. One of the best horizontal worship songs that we have is actually the hymn, To God Be the Glory. Nowhere in the song, To God Be the Glory, do we sing directly to God. If you look at it, we're admonishing one another. I'm saying to you, praise the Lord, let the earth hear his voice. Praise the Lord, let the people rejoice. Oh, come to the Father through Jesus the Son and give him the glory, great things he's done. I'm telling you that, but it's not a song directly to God. So finding a little bit of balance between some of those types of songs, looking for the lyrics, how much of it is horizontal, how much of it is lyrical. We want to take a look at the view of God too, making sure that our songs have a healthy transcendent versus immanent quality. So transcendent is going to be our view of God as God the creator, God the sovereign God. Anything that talks about his kingship or his lordship, the transcendence of God. As opposed to his immanent qualities would be like God who is Emmanuel, God with us, God our friend, God who is in human flesh. So you want to make sure that you've got a balance of songs there. We have an awful lot of new songs that are very overly immanent all the time. It's always this personal feeling song, personal about what God has done for me, or what I can do, what God, instead of what God has done in terms of his lordship and his kingship. So trying to find a healthy balance there. We want to use a balanced pronoun use also. So there's a lot of songs that are written by a person that talk about I this, I that, I this, me, I. There is an argument for the collective I, that as we sing this together, as we're singing our collective I's, that we're worshiping together, but we need to be looking for songs that have a we or an us in them. Now, I'm telling you, you cannot change lyrics to songs if they're copyrighted, so don't try. That is against the law. But be looking for songs that have a we this, a we-centric focus. You're also going to be looking for songs that have a good melodic range. Your average singer is not going to have a really high range, female or male. And I hear a lot of worship pastors that have really high voices that just love to sing way up here all the time. And, that's just not doable for the average singer. So you've got to pitch it in a key that's kind of pretty good. Anything above about an E flat for a female or a male, which would be right above middle C, or the top space for a female, is probably about as high as anybody's going to be able to comfortably go with a medium kind of range, an untrained singer voice. You need to look at the rhythm of the song. Is it overly complicated? One of the things that we're noticing about songs that are written today is that they have a lot more syncopation in them, and they can be very difficult for the average church member to sing unless there's enough repetition for it. So you've got to be careful about how much you balance there with the rhythm as well. You need to have clear text. We talked a little bit about that, the theologically and doctrinally rich there. But your songs always need to fit the context of your church. If I can leave you with one phrase or one word that I want you to remember when choosing congregational song, is the word familiarity. And I think that's the next slide anyway. When you are choosing songs, choose familiarity. Every single service should have at least one familiar song. Now, what's familiar to First Baptist, whatever, or such and such a creek, or such and such a church here, or Ivy Creek Baptist where I am, may be different. Familiar songs may be songs that are new, but have become a special part of your church. We did a revival several years ago, and we were learning, it came out in the late 2000s, called Our God Saves, Paul Balash's Our God Saves. We used it for revival. It caught wind very, very quickly in our church, and it is now one of our favorite songs. It's not rotating probably on everybody in this room's favorite playlist, but it's regularly sung at my church because it is a familiar song that means something to us because it was attached to a very important revival period in our church as we were going through there. Does it make sense, the whole idea of familiarity? I want to make sure that, because it's very important. Familiarity is not old new. Don't say, hey, I need to make sure I have a hymn in every service. I need to have a worship song in every service. I need to have a certain type of song. No, the word you're looking for is a familiar song. Every single person in your church, listen to me, every single person who sings, and we all know there's people who are going to sit there like this through the whole thing. But the people who know how to sing or the people who are going to participate, everybody should have something that they feel like they know and can participate in every worship service. Are you going to knock that out of the park every week? Absolutely not. But that is your goal. Your goal is, how can I think about all of the variety of people that you have in a church of 200 or a church of 2,000? And I want to make sure there's something familiar. I regularly go to worship services at certain times. I remember being in a worship service a couple of months ago. I knew nothing, and I feel like I'm pretty up with what's going on. And I tried to participate, but I felt like I was robbed a little bit of the musical worship time because I knew nothing. And your people feel that way too if you are selecting songs like that. Wow, we're doing great on time. We were just rushing right through. Okay, good. We'll have times for questions, and maybe I won't be able to answer them. Well, one of the things I want to talk about, and I don't have all the answers because this is still new, is I want to talk a little bit about multiple worship styles. There are churches that, because of COVID or because of whatever reason, no matter what you have in your scenario, there are churches that are looking to bring their styles back together or to find a new kind of intergenerational style that looks like something that's maybe new. I don't know if that's anybody in this church. My church has been fairly intentional about their intergenerational kind of behavior. So we've always had just one kind of style, which kind of changes. There's not really a way to blend it, I guess would be the best word for it, but we just do all kinds of stuff. But if you were looking to go back to one style, I've done some research. I've talked to several churches. There's one of them is a very prominent church I know in Texas that's recently gone to Tallowood, has gone back from multiple styles into one, even this last year. And so they're one of the churches that I've talked with their staff about trying to figure out what were the things that you did to try to bring you back under one kind of worship style. And here's some of the things that they said. First thing is pray. Pray at every single step. If you're looking to merge two different styles with two different worship teams, with two different bodies under one roof, two different corporate bodies who have learned to appreciate their worship style more than the other, you're going to have to pray really hard as you make that transition all the way through. The second thing is, and this is so vital, it must be senior pastor led. If you're the worship pastor in this room and you want to do this, your senior pastor has to have that vision or it will not happen. It will not happen. It just won't. It must be senior pastor led. Having your children's pastors, having your staff would be your next level after your senior pastor, having them all on board, understanding the fact that this is that whole unified style is really what you're looking for. And again, it's not going to look the same. If you're merging a contemporary style and a traditional style together, nothing is ever going to look the same. You may really tick off some people and they go, well, we're not getting this, we're not getting that, but that's why it takes a long time. One of the things that I didn't put in here, every church that I interviewed, talked to, it took them a minimum of 9 to 12 months from the moment they started praying and really seeking God and seeking how they're going to do that. Sometimes it took up to 2 years of that transition, slowly transitioning toward like a launch Sunday when they were going to bring under there. But the third thing is that you want to do is you want to use singers and players from both services. If you're going to merge together, you're going to have to kind of bring them together. So you may have guitar player from here. You may have an organist from here. You may have singer from here and a singer from there. And you may have a tech person from here and a tech person from there. And you're kind of bringing them all together. You need to utilize and use those people. They need to be on the platform. Because if you go to one service and you don't see anybody who was in worship leadership on the platform, it doesn't show unity, does it? It doesn't show that you were together. So you want to do that. The fourth thing is you want to use a common set list. There's undoubtedly, the way most churches are today, there's going to be songs that overlap to some degree. It may be Amazing Grace, My Chains Are Gone. It may be How Great Is Our God. It could be something that kind of sits in between that nebulous place between traditional and contemporary. And we all know what that is. But whatever those are, try to find those common set lists and do that. As you're introducing or reintroducing new songs, you want to do so slowly. You want to make sure that people don't think, well, gosh, all they're doing is they're getting their songs and they're just infiltrating this service. And you want to do it very slowly. And there still might be some of that people, no matter how slowly you think you're doing it, they're going to say it anyway. They're going to say it. They're going to say it. But that's okay. Remember, as you're telling people what you're doing, you're always emphasizing we're aiming for familiarity. We're aiming to be biblically based. We're aiming to be unified. We're aiming to use all these keywords. We're aiming to be biblically faithful to who we are. The sixth thing is you don't try to be like everyone else. Don't try to emulate the church down the street just because they have some success. I'm surrounded by no less than 6 mega churches within a 20-mile radius of my church. I just am. Every metro area is. I just don't know of one that isn't. And if we tried to be like the one down the street, we would fail miserably. And so we figured out who we were and what we wanted to be and what God had already brought to our people. We are a choir and orchestra-driven church, and that's who we are. If you walked in, you probably would say, they're probably a little more traditional. Okay, whatever. Who cares? I don't care what title you give us. But that's what it is. That's who we are. Focus on what makes your church unique. You've got to focus on what makes your church unique. And if you do traditional well, be the best traditional that you possibly can be. In fact, be so good at it that when people are moving to your community or you're in evangelizing your neighbor, they say, oh, they do this really, really well, and this is who we want to be. Figure out who you are and be that. You need to consider all the pragmatic issues that go along with making these changes. And I don't have time to talk about each and every one of those, but you all know what those are. It may mean that you're going to have 2 Sunday school periods instead of 1, or you've had 2, and maybe now you have 1. Parking may be an issue because you may decide to go from 2 actual services to just 1 service. Maybe your church has a room big enough and you've been in 2 different venues, maybe in a gym or a fellowship building or in your sanctuary, but you have enough space to do 1 service. And so maybe you've got a whole bunch of pragmatic issues that you've got to deal with. Talk about those, work through those as well. But the biggest thing is that as your leadership team needs to work as a team, you need to work as a team as you look to make all these changes there together. It's wonderful. And then the last thing I've got is just a really, really long list here of some really cool ways that you can be intentionally intergenerational in your worship ministry. This is not an exhaustive list. It's just one of many lists. In fact, I know it's not exhaustive because people regularly will tell me things. In fact, I've added to the list as time's gone on as I've talked to different people as they've gone through their as we've gone through some of these seminars that I've taught over the last several months. So we just keep adding to the list when people come up with those types of things. So, yes. Yes, and here's the book. One more plug for the book. If you haven't picked it up, you can pick it up at the Connect 360 booth there in Brazos, wherever all the convention exhibitors are.
And on the back page is a QR code. You can buy it right there too.
Yeah, you don't want to have it shipped because it's more expensive to have it shipped. You want to get it today. At least, I think it may be more than that. I think it's more than that to ship it.
We have a couple minutes for questions.
Oh, Lord. Yes.
I'm going to throw him a softball. Who's the #1 college football team in the country?
Bulldogs. I am not. I'm an Auburn grad. But yes. I'm an Auburn grad, but I have a dog son, and so I will root for the dogs because I root for my child. So when he is in the Redcoat marching band, and so he's having the time of his life right now on their winning streak. Yes.
So I'm the worship leader at a bilingual church, and
She's a worship leader at a bilingual church. I'm just saying it so people can.
I'm kind of in a place sometimes when I'm planning worship, and I could just stick with the songs that people know, that everyone knows, and that I want to do. But there's been a new song, new hymn, that is catching my attention, and I would like to start incorporating it.
Yes.
But it would just be easier to stay with what you know rather than try to, because then they could not like the new song and then it's a total.
And it's okay. It's okay. It's okay.
No, I know. I'm just wondering, like, how do you discern that? Is it time?
Yes, it's time. Yeah, she's asking how to discern whether or not a new song is going to catch wind or not. You just try. Is that really what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to, if you have vetted it for all of the factors that we've looked for, it's a great song. It speaks to what we want to talk about theologically. It helps us understand our faith better. It helps us connect with God because of what the lyrics say. And musically, it's catchy. It's something that we're going to want to sing for the rest of our lives. And every song I introduce, I want to say, is this a song that I think that people could sing potentially for the rest of their days? And if not, then we don't learn a lot of new songs. But it is something you need to do that, or your church is going to get too stale. So that's the beauty about the intergenerational church, is that you've got that youthfulness that's going to constantly keep moving you forward. And so look for songs that you can basically say, it may fail, it may not catch on, and that's okay. You just, all of a sudden, it just kind of disappears from showing up on Sunday mornings, and no one will know the wiser. But generally, some of those songs, especially as you notice they're catching wind, and you want to at least initially really bring them up more frequently. It's okay to sing songs more than 1 week. I had a tech guy that told me one time there's a reason why popular music, they play a song in rotation 8 times a day on the radio, because people want to hear songs they like. They want to hear songs that they know and that kind of thing. So you may be really tired of a song before they do it because you've picked it, you've rehearsed it for 3 times or 4 times before, then you've rehearsed it Sunday morning, and then you've sung it. And so you've heard the song 12 times before a person has sung it once. And so you may be really tired of a song before they are. Did that answer your question, sort of?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yes.
Particularly in a smaller congregation where the talent pool is not dozens of people.
Right.
How do you balance the wanting to encourage those who want to participate and who want to help with worship with what their actual talent level is? If you're not dealing with a congregation full of people in the
Sure.
and they want to help, how do you balance that?
Well, you look for easy arrangements of things. So I would constantly look for congregational songs. I know that Lifeway Worship puts out pretty easy charts or whatever. Even Praise Charts has simplified versions of different worship songs. So look for things that are very easy, where the chord changes are a lot short. Depending on who you're using, if you're using rhythm players, whatever, I would imagine. Look for those simplified versions or whatever. You're going to have to be very discerning about what you do in terms of picking those things. And look for things that they can play well. If something doesn't play well, I wouldn't use it, even if it's popular. So you're always looking for the win. That may be a very too general answer for your question. Yes, Larry?
Well, in answer to him, too,
Yeah.
if you have somebody who is you're trying to work into, whether that's a guitarist or a pianist, they don't have to play the whole service.
Right.
Choose a tune.
Yeah, no, that's excellent.
They can have a win.
Excellent.
And
Yes.
Then let them step out and let the others take over.
No, I love that. That's great. Thank you. Good word.
Thank y'all so much. We need to let worship services next. So
Thank you.